What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Bronx Pinstripe Show. We've got a special guest host, Andy Martino of SNY, covers the Yankees and Mets, with Scott in Vegas for the Super Bowl. Hopefully he's not in a ditch upside down somewhere. Andy, welcome to the show.
Hello, Andrew. Nice to be back.
Yes, you've been on a couple times. We've talked at length about Brian Cashman and his relationship with Steinbrenner, and I don't know if maybe the end is coming soon for Cashman if things don't turn around for the Yankees, and I'm definitely interested in getting your thoughts on that. But first, off the top, how do you think this offseason has gone for the Yankees?
I think, and they think, Andrew, that it's gone pretty well, although I do sense some level of disappointment or lack of total satisfaction with what they've been able to accomplish on the pitching front. We know how good they are at finding diamond in the rough relievers and turning them into better relievers, and they trust their program as far as that goes. And in terms of the rotation, look, there's so much upside still there with Carlos Rodon, who still has amazing stuff. And maybe that solves the issue if he can get back to himself. But of course, they would have liked to have added a Corbin Burns, a Dylan Cease, a Blake Snell. I mean, they could have controlled that. I mean, they didn't want it enough to pay whatever it took for any of these players, whether in dollars or prospects. But if their self-assessment, which is obviously more important than my assessment, is that they'd like just a little bit more high-end pitching, but they feel pretty okay about where they're at.
And that's where I have a problem with the offseason. Like, obviously, no one who has watched more than one inning of baseball is going to tell you Juan Soto was a bad deal for this team. Like, obviously, they've upgraded the lineup. They've upgraded the outfield, which was a complete disaster last year. But when they basically went into this offseason telling us, like, we have to upgrade the lineup, but also Yamamoto is our top target on the market, who's a top-end starting pitcher for the next decade. And then you don't get that. And what they fall back on is Stroman, nice pitcher, hopefully can overcome some injury problems last year and be a nice middle of the rotation piece. But there's just still so many question marks in this rotation behind Cole that by the Yankees' own doing and telling us Yamamoto was their top target and then not getting something comparable to Yamamoto when he signed with the Dodgers, like, it's an easy second guess for fans to say, well, you didn't do what you even set out to do. And there's still pitchers available out there. And we see Corbin Burns get traded to the Orioles last week. And we see other trade targets there. And then there's still two free agents available, whether they want to sign with the Yankees or not. Like, we can talk about that, but you still have Montgomery and Snell on the market. If they really want to upgrade the starting rotation, they could pay for that. And so that's where I think, I have a problem with this offseason.
That's where, if you're hanging out with the Yankees brass, they would probably not strongly disagree with some of what, or a lot of what you just said. As I just articulated, they wanted a little more high-end pitching. I will say that any team that missed out on Yamamoto felt a tremendous sense of relief, probably, because
I heard you say that. Yeah, I saw that clip and you say that, and it's just because of the year commitment.
It was like, you know what? It got crazy. And this can happen, obviously, with free agency. It was like when this offseason began and when I first started reporting on this in earnest, it was like, hey, Kodai Senga with the Mets got $75 million. Hey, Yamamoto might double that because he's really good. Okay, cool. And then as the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Mets start in the process of having these meetings and making their bids, all of a sudden it's like, how did we get to Garrett Cole money for someone who's never thrown a pitch in this league? It is insane. So there's no baseball operations department in this game that would have wanted to give him, no offense to him, maybe he's great. This actually isn't a comment on how he's going to pitch. No one would have wanted to give him that contract. And if the Yankees had given him 10 years and $300 million, if he would have taken that offer, which they were probably like, oh, here's the offer, go to the Dodgers. I might be exaggerating a little, but if he would have done that, they would have been so hamstrung because, like every team, they operate with a budget. It's obviously a significantly higher budget than any other team, just about, other than the Dodgers and Mets.
Not anymore. Not anymore. The Dodgers, what they're doing.
Well, I said other than the Dodgers and Mets.
Yeah.
But my point is they have a budget, so you sign a guy to a 10-year deal as the situation they're in with Stanton right now, and it hamstrings you in certain ways for years to come. So I think any team would rather patch together a rotation in ways other than giving one guy that kind of money, unless he's Garrett Cole. Snell is another. We could certainly, there's a discussion to be had over whether he's worth the 200 plus million that he wants. The Yankees ended up getting a real bargain on Stroman because of the questions that have followed him about the way he comports himself. He took a huge haircut on his contract for the quality of pitcher that he is. So they went in that direction, and we'll see how that goes. I've never said that I liked that signing. But
the Stroman signing?
Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Do you not like it? Well, will you say right now, do you like it or dislike it, or you want to remain on the fence about it? Are your questions with Stroman more his pitching capabilities or his fit for the Yankees in that clubhouse?
I think the pitching, some of the injuries last year, particularly the hip, are somewhat concerning. Marcus Stroman, who I covered with the Mets for a couple of years, is such a complicated person that it's really hard to talk about him without having an extremely in-depth conversation. He's intelligent. He's made really good points, really good critiques of the way that sports is covered, the way that unconscious bias. Like, for example, when Diamondbacks broadcaster Bob Brenly said, "Oh, you just never saw Tom Seaver wear a do-rag," Stroman made a great strong critique of that. There have been other times when he's come after reporters and probably fans too online where it's like a little too strong. Liking a tweet with an anti-Italian slur was something that sticks in one's craw. But at the same time, this is a guy whose anger might be justified based on the way he was treated growing up as a young black kid in Long Island. So I just think like Marcus Stroman is like, his personality is like a graduate seminar that we could all have. So I don't want to like say, something that can be reduced to he's a good guy or he's a bad guy. It's very complicated. And I think that as far as how he's going to fit in the clubhouse, I do think he's a guy who managers like because he competes his ass off. Luis Rojas, of course, his former manager, current Yankees third base coach, was consulted about this, and he gave him a strong stamp of approval. I can tell you that. I think he and Cole are going to like each other because they both have that pitching nerd side. They're very interested in not just pitch design and things of that nature, but biomechanics and all kinds of technical stuff that they could talk about. They're very, very different guys, but have that common interest. So I think he could fit okay. I just think that you're going to have your moments where it's like, I mean, it's good that he's off social media, so maybe at least those moments won't spill into the public.
Well, and obviously it is always going to come back to his on-field performance. If he's pitching well, those other things won't be magnified. And if he's struggling, those things will be magnified. We saw that with Carlos Rodon last year when he was injured for up until July. He comes back, he struggles, and he flips off a fan or blows it. Whatever. He blew a kiss to a fan. Blew a kiss to a fan. Yeah.
You know what? I would talk about
which I said on the podcast that next day. I would have rather he flipped someone off. That's less offensive than blowing a kiss sarcastically.
I'll tell a little backstory about that. I think I reported it I think I wrote a little thing or buried in a column or something in the year, but just to like the complexity of all these situations. When that was going on, there was a guy with his little, I believe it was daughter, I want to say not son, but a little child who was sitting right behind the Yankees dugout in Anaheim, who was cursing out Josh Donaldson and saying really filthy things to him through the game. And it was like, dude, you got your little girl here. And finally, Donaldson turns to the guy. He's like, "Are you proud of yourself? What you're saying in front of your child here?" And that was the guy that Rodon blew the kiss at.
Oh,
there was
okay.
a prior situation going on there. So that, like there's always more than we know.
Sure.
And I didn't hear that until much later. A little bit later. But the showing up of Matt Blake later in the season was real.
Yep.
And that was not great. And overall, I will say that between Rodon, Stroman, and Alex Verdugo,
he's another one I forgot
Aaron
about.
Judge, the captain, and Aaron Boone, the manager, do have a fair amount of important players who have, fair or not, been followed by questions of like makeup, as they call it, through their career. And I don't want to paint these guys with too broad a brush. I don't even know. I've never I don't know Alex Verdugo. I know Stroman. I know Rodon a little. Everyone's complex, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that Boone's elite level clubhouse management will get a further test this year with some of the personalities that are in there.
I can't tell if you're being sarcastic when you
No,
say
I
that.
mean it.
Okay.
He's one of the best at that, at dealing with people.
Well, that's the
And
whole reason he was hired. It was his hopefully ability to communicate with the players and manage a clubhouse and manage personalities, because that has become more important, probably not just in baseball, in all sports, than your on-field tactics.
yeah, and his on-field tactics is another conversation. I think they've dramatically improved over the years. But he's a real culture builder, and now he's absorbing some guys in who have had some trouble elsewhere. Boone is really close friends with Alex Cora, and Cora and Verdugo had a hard time
Yep.
with each other.
He got benched for hustle, I know,
Yeah,
with Boston,
yeah,
which Yankees and Red Sox fans are similar in that sense. You dog it down first base, you're going to get booed. Like that's
yeah.
an easy thing to boo a player about. So, but
These things can go.
I don't know that Boone benches a player for lack of hustle. I know Alex Cora does. I don't know that Boone does.
He benched Aaron Hicks once mid-game when Hicks fell asleep in the middle of a ball or went
Derek Jeter
dropped.
night.
Yeah. Oh, was it? I didn't remember that.
It was Jeter was being honored for something that night, and Aaron Hicks had just a disastrous game.
I remember both of those events, but I didn't remember that they were on the same day.
Yeah.
So it's a good recall by you. Now, the one critique, and I told this to Boone's face, is that he did the right thing with Hicks, but then he said at the end of the game, I wasn't punitive. It's like,
It's like, yeah, just own it.
You did the right thing. Just say you did the right thing.
It's okay.
But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But that's a good point that he's not one to embarrass a guy, and that's one of the reasons plays like with guys like Verdugo. From what I understand about Verdugo, with Rodon and Stroman and guys, if you're winning, they have a great edge. If you're losing, they're cancerous, and it's a lot of perception involved.
I think the same thing probably with Donaldson. And Donaldson didn't play well. I think he had an okay first half of 2022. The whole team was great in 2022 first half, right? But Donaldson really struggled last year. I mean, we were looking at the numbers. It was hard to believe he had 11 hits and 9 of them were home runs at one point. It was
I remember that.
It was just weird. But he became a problem because he wasn't hitting, and then he got benched, and he has always been a questionable clubhouse guy. But you're right. As long as the on-field is going well, you can overcome things in the clubhouse. Verdugo, I'm less worried about because this is a 1-year thing. If he doesn't work out with the Yankees, you could get rid of him mid-season, really. If it's that bad, I'm not too worried about that. Stroman's a multi-year deal. Rodon, I'm petrified of, just with how last season went and the commitment they made to him, which, to take it back to the rotation and them not doing something to shore up the rotation. Beyond Cole, everyone has a question mark. And anytime you go into a 162 game season, one or more of those question marks is going to actually be a problem in a season. And then at that point, what is this rotation? What is the depth there? They traded Michael King, who I'm not second guessing. Of course, you trade Michael King for Juan Soto in that package, but he was going to be another depth guy in this rotation.
You feel that loss for sure.
And at the very least, Michael King was going to be the weapon he was in the bullpen for you the past few years. And now they're talking about Loaizaga taking that role. Loaizaga has never stayed healthy in a season he's been in the major leagues. So the depth and question marks in this pitching staff, not just the rotation, to me is a big problem going into this season. And I don't know how you go into this year basically saying we're pushing all our chips in, we're trading for Juan Soto, we're making these moves. It's a win or bust type of season with Cole and Judge still in their primes. I don't know how you don't just go out and try and clear up some more of your question marks. Maybe they do it in spring, maybe they do it in the middle of the season, but they have the resources to do it now, and that's my issue.
Well, let me try to presume to put you in Brian Cashman's mind a little bit on that issue.
I love this.
Because
I can do this.
I've spent quite a bit of time, and especially in the past couple of years, talking a lot with him and about his process. And he tends not to think in broad strokes like that. He thinks about it transaction to transaction. So you can agree or disagree, but so he's not, the way you just framed it would be a very foreign framing to Brian Cashman in the way his mind works. And I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm saying he would think, okay, the Soto trade happens in a vacuum where players available because the Padres are where they are. We've accumulated a good amount of pitching depth where it's going to hurt to trade all those young pitchers, but we can probably absorb it. It's 1 year, so we're not too worried about the money. Hal Steinbrenner is okay going over $300 million. All these things like add up to that transaction. Okay, this transaction now makes sense. I can live with it. And on the Soto one with a star player like that, I'm sure you have folks from the business side saying too, there's a marketability factor, there's a fan morale factor.
Yeah.
Those things go into it. So all those things made that transaction make sense. Okay, great. Now you move on to Yamamoto. We've already talked about that. A little bit of relief that doesn't work out. Then you go on to Snell. I don't know that they actually made an offer to Snell. In fact, I'm told that they have not. But that might be
so the
semantic.
5 and it was like 5 and 180 was the report or something like that,
Yeah,
or 6 and
so
180.
they've talked terms. Whether they made an offer, whatever. I guess that's
That doesn't seem close though, right? Like, so that's essentially a non-offer if he's asking for 220.
So you go into that and you say, okay, this is about what we think this pitcher's worth based on his production and our projections. And so this is what we're comfortable with. Oh, this is where you are? That doesn't make sense for the Yankees. That's the way he thinks, right? So now all on the offseason, they've been talking to the White Sox about Dylan Cease, and we're talking to Brewers about Corbin Burns. Okay, Brewers GM Matt Arnold. Let's have a conversation. What are you looking for Burns? Now, Andrew, I can't give you the players' names. I wish I could. But I can tell you that the initial conversation was like, whoa, nope, that makes no sense. Sorry. We're not.
Can we stop there for a second? So to me, do you think, I know I'm asking you to speculate, but do you think the Brewers, based on what they ended up getting from Baltimore, I have to imagine they were only asking for prospects. They weren't asking for major league pieces, right?
They were looking for, those players are a little older. They were looking for close to major league ready. They weren't looking for like.
Do you think Volpe was in the conversation?
I couldn't say.
Because
I
other than
cannot say. I'm not holding back on you.
Other than so Volpe, I understand like they're not going to trade away who they hope is their future all-star shortstop, and like you trade away Volpe, then who's playing shortstop this year? So I get that, but like if it's Spencer Jones or even Jason Dominguez, like to just hang up the phone immediately, I think is not doing your job if you're Brian Cashman. Like you have to have that conversation because Corbin Burns, I know he's only a 1-year player, but like we don't know what Spencer Jones is going to be. Like he's far away from the major leagues. Jason Dominguez played 8 games last year and he's out until the middle of the season. I don't want to trade Jason Dominguez, but I'm not hanging up the phone immediately.
Well, perhaps they had a polite ending of the conversation. It may have been, and talked about their families and small talk. I mean, it may not have been an immediate hang up, but I hear what you're saying. And again, to them, it's just, and I can't say who. All I know is the names that were discussed. It did not get serious to the point where like it was Brian Cashman with his inner circle. Would you do this? Would you do that? He never got that far down the tracks, and then he's an Oriole. But again, they look at it transaction to transaction. What is 1 year of Corbin Burns at that salary point worth? And then what is the cost we're willing to pay? And they look at it in the way that he feels. And I would say just about every general manager feels, with some exceptions, is like, I owe it to my owner and our have the fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders and like all those kinds of things that come into be rational about each transaction and take it sort of one by one and say, does this make sense? So going through all those, it was no, this doesn't. And some of that is Cashman may return to it, say a Dylan Cease conversation at another point. You can't just bend over right away if you want something. Like you don't become a good GM by like having urgency. You don't like, oh, I got to need this guy. I mean, that's kind of what they did with Soto by giving up like 8 pitchers. And Michael King was right. They probably did lose that deal in a pure baseball sense, but okay, fine. We got to get Soto, whatever, fine. Like they weren't going to trade King. It was going to have to be Schmidt. And then 3 days later, fine, we'll give you King. If you acted like that on every trade, you'd have an atrocious organization. So that's, but then the sum total of that is what I see in your body language, I think is all right, well, shit, we don't have enough pitching.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Exactly. You find yourself in a situation where you fall short, and then what good is hanging on to pieces for next year when I understand you can't operate in eternity under that, but I think there are points as a general manager, as an owner, or
hmm,
even in a game as a manager, as a coach, whatever. There's go for it moments depending on the situation
sure.
you're in. And I think this needed to be a go for it off season, and what they did was they almost went for it with the moves they've made so far. And the
Yeah.
offseason's not over. I grant them that. Let's see how the roster looks on opening day. Let's see how the team is shaking out and if they can make a deal in July. All of that is still on the table.
Hmm.
But I, there's just in my opinion it was an incomplete. Like it's not a fail obviously, but it's like you didn't do what you set out to do this offseason by your own admission.
Well, I think on one level, as we said at the beginning of this conversation, I think the Yankees would privately agree with what you're saying for the
Yeah.
most part. But again, they look at it like,
Transaction. Yeah, you don't want to lose out on every on a specific deal in a vacuum. And I understand that angle of it too. And then there's certainly, I'm sure, whether it's scouts, analysts, whoever that Cashman is working with that are pushing him to win those deals because that's what they're being paid to do for the organization. So yeah, that makes. Do you think that has always been Cashman's mentality, or do you think that has evolved? Because I know
oh,
you've
definitely.
you've spent a lot of time with them, and this book you've got coming out is probably going to get into a lot of this.
He doesn't think about like narrative arcs or big picture stuff as much. Like, for example, in interviewing him for the book, I asked him a couple of questions like about past years when you took over as GM after being assistant GM. Did you think like they made the Chuck Knobloch trade just a couple of days later? And like, did you think like, okay, now's my chance to put a stamp on the roster? He's like, no, not really. We were talking about Knobloch when Bob Watson was here, and we were blah blah blah, and it's like, and then we were able to get the deal to the finish line. I didn't think of it like, oh, now I'm in charge. I'd been working on this all along. He kind of thinks of it like that. So when you try to think like put like a broad stroke narrative on him, he really pushes back. Another one would be when I said after the 2001 season, when all of those dynasty era guys retired, uh, did you look at it like because this was a group that developed obviously late 80s, early to mid 90s when Cashman was working under Stick Michael and Bob Watson and so now these a lot of these guys that you traded for developed are on the way out. I asked Cashman, do you now see this as now it's my chance to put my stamp on a roster for a new age for the Yankees? And he's like, as you might expect, he would say at this point in our conversation, he said, no, I really just thought of it as, okay, what is our payroll? What are our needs? All right, O'Neill's retiring, so John Vanderwall is a free agent, or Rondell White, or whatever it was, and I
It
just
was
thought like,
John
okay,
Vanderwall. Yeah.
yeah. So it was just it's all very process based,
Yeah.
and the way that we talk about his team in columns or on the radio or in podcasts or whatever is very different from the way that he wakes up in the morning and thinks about how to go about his job. It just and again, we're talking about Brian Cashman, but you could say the same for just about any head of baseball operations. But
Yep.
this is the guy who I happen to have interviewed at length about his entire career, and at every turn, like okay, after '04, when that disaster happens in the ALCS, like are you like motivated to try to? Well, no, because we saw we had an opportunity with Randy Johnson. I mean, you
Come
see where I'm
on.
going with it.
Like that's why I need to push
They
back.
don't
Like you're
think like
being a
that.
little disingenuous there. Like that was obviously a more reactionary move, which I get. Like you just blew an ALCS lead, and pitching was your problem. So
That's fair, and they wouldn't frame it like they would acknowledge, as I said before, like there may be some other voices out of baseball ops that have certain moves, like Juan Soto and maybe Randy Johnson was an example of that. But my point is, he doesn't sit there the morning after the ALCS and go, "God damn those Red Sox, we need revenge," like it would happen, like a fan would fantasize about it.
yeah,
It's just,
I get it.
you know,
I totally understand, and I know that would be not good for the long term, and I
right?
understand that. You mentioned like he's very process oriented, and I think back to that. I think it was at the GM meetings this past year when Cashman did that I called
Oh
it
yeah.
powwow. Were you at that? Were you in
Oh, I
that crowd?
sure was all
Okay.
67 minutes of it.
Oh my God, that was beautiful. We analyzed the hell out of that
I'm
thing.
sure you did.
That was the most emotion I've ever seen him show, the most defense. He was very defensive, defending the process and everything. Obviously, called the injuries as a reason why this. So all of that, and it was so interesting because like 4 hours earlier, Hal's doing that Zoom call where he's kind of saying some opposite things of what Cashman was screaming about to all you guys that afternoon. And so yeah, he was very defensive of his process and everything that they did.
Oh
And I
yes,
think I think it was Joel Sherman who was pressing him on Peraza, right? Like why didn't Peraza play?
those
Uh,
two were back and forth on a
yeah,
couple of things. I think that was one of them. Yeah.
yeah, and so and it's like that's a whole other thing where it's like they've done this before with prospects. Like Peraza's not the first one. They did it with Andujar, although he had more major league time. Obviously, Clint Frazier. They did it with Estevan Florial, where they hang on to these prospects, hang on, hang on, hang on. The prospects lose value when at
Hmm.
one time maybe they could have gotten you a major league piece, and then they end up giving them away for nothing or DFAing them or whatever. And it's like if you could have traded Peraza in a package 2 years ago for somebody, or if you could have traded Florial a couple years ago for somebody, and what if 2 years from now we're saying you could have traded Spencer Jones in a package for Corbin Burns, and now what is Spencer Jones? He's fighting for a roster spot in spring training, like, and he's
Yeah.
27
Well,
years old.
projections are so difficult in this game. I mean, because at the same time, I mean, sure, and they've been burned that way before. Obviously, Frazier and Andahar, et cetera. That's been a thing. But at the same time, when the when they really wanted Andrelton Simmons and Jason Hayward in 2014,
Yeah, I
and
know
it would
that.
have cost Judge Severino and
Yep.
Sanchez,
Yeah, yeah,
we
of
could have been
course.
like, well, you don't know what Aaron Judge is striking out every other at bat in
Yep.
the major leagues. Trade him for Andrelton Simmons. Why wouldn't you?
It would have been
Any
disastrous. It would have been
right.
disastrous. Yeah.
So those are the toughest calls. One thing that the Yankees do better than just about any organization is scout their own system. And this is why, yes, sometimes they hold on to guys too long, but they very rarely get burned with who they give up. And that, like, literally, what I mean by that is
Yeah.
when you go to I go to Somerset a fair amount because I live not far from that, and they're Double A team, and every single time I'm in Somerset, either Tim Nearing is there, their VP of baseball operations, Matt Daly, their head of scouting, Kevin Reese, the head of player development. They have a high level person watching their own players in almost every minor league game. The Mets do not do this. The other team that I covered, so when they're trading people, you're relying on prospect rankings, which are a lot of, like, these guys work hard that make these
But
prospect
they're
rankings.
looking at 30
Yeah.
systems, and it's like, how could you
So
possibly really evaluate any single player when you're trying to evaluate thousands, or not thousands, however many it is,
yeah,
hundreds of players?
the Yankees, who have, as Cashman said that day angrily, and he was right, they have one of the most robust pro scouting departments in the game, and they watch their own minor leaguers in a way that I do not see any other team do.
Okay.
And I go to a fair amount of minor league games, so uh,
The flip
uh,
side to that, though, is those players have not materialized into major league talent. Yes, Aaron Judge turned into one of the best players in baseball. You have to give credit to the Yankees. You also have to give credit for Aaron Judge for
of course,
going outside of the organization and revamping his swing. But other than that, they've consistently been able to develop quad A players, talent that hits at the minor league level, gets to the major league level, gets exposed, doesn't get consistent playing time, and that's what Joel Sherman was pressing Cashman about that day. Is
yeah.
like you had no options at third base. Josh Donaldson was a disaster. At least play Peraza, and then Cashman is sitting there saying, well, where would he play? Where would he play? It's like, well, the truth is because Peraza can't hit at the major league level. That's why he didn't play. And you've held on to Peraza. So as much as they've, to your point, like been good about evaluating their talent and not giving up someone that's going to blow up in their face, they've also not properly evaluated those players for their capabilities of playing on their major league team.
That's true. They've held on to some guys for too long, 100%. I don't know of a deal that where Peraza alone or Peraza as the centerpiece would have gotten you anyone that I can remember.
Wasn't he in the Castillo from the Reds? Wasn't he?
Yeah, but they would have been Volpe and Peraza. You wouldn't have been
They
able
were
to get
both of
Castillo.
those guys.
I would have to double check this, but I'm almost positive that they would not have gotten Castillo without trading Volpe.
Okay. Well, but
Maybe I'm wrong. I don't. I'm speaking off of memory.
You're right.
Here.
Maybe Peraza was never going to be the centerpiece of a trade.
And by the way, Peraza should be their shortstop. I think I'll go off on the Yankees on this one. They are misevaluating their infielders, in my opinion, and when Anthony Volpe plays shortstop, you're like, there is a second baseman who's doing an unbelievable job of turning himself into a
But
shortstop.
he's a
And when
Gold
you watch
Glove
Peraza, you're
finalist.
like, oh my God, that's a shortstop.
Yeah.
So that's the shortstop.
Yes, I don't know. You obviously know more about that than I do, but they hope at least Volpe can be a league average or better hitter. Can Peraza even be close to that? Because he's not shown that.
I think that we don't know, and it would have behooved the Yankees to find a. It's easier to said than done because you have Gleyber Torres second.
This might be the last year of
It,
Glaber, although
um,
if he
yeah,
has a good year, they're probably going to pay him, and I would not
I'm
like
not
that.
feeling that. I'm not feeling that. Anything could happen, but I feel like he's going to be playing somewhere else in a year.
I
Um,
hope he has a good year and gets a contract from someone else, frankly.
yeah. But anyway, uh, I'm, by the way, I'm not like reporting that he's gone. I'm just saying like they've never tried to extend him.
Don't worry,
All the
we
things,
won't
yeah.
blow up your spot.
It's not you guys. It's the rest of the internet. You say something, and the next thing you know. Anyway, um, I I don't know if what Peraza's bat would do if in a
Yeah.
with a full
Your
sampling
point
of
is
plate
though
appearances.
he's a true defensive major league shortstop.
And yeah,
Volpe is. I mean, he played better at shortstop defensively than I think a lot of people thought he was going to do last year.
he won the Gold Glove somehow.
Yeah, Gold Gloves, whatever. But
Yeah,
like
but
I watched a lot of games and I used my eyes, and he was better defensively than
yeah,
I thought he was going to be. He was worse offensively than I thought he was going to be,
but
which
you
is a
know the
problem.
difference. You watched a lot of games, so I bet you know the difference between like, hey, that looks pretty good versus like, holy shit, that's the guy.
Yeah,
Like, I'll give you a Judge in center field. Hey, wow, not bad. Bader in center field. Whoa, that's a
yeah,
center fielder.
yeah.
That's to me. I'm not saying Peraza's Bader-esque in his defense, but he makes plays in the arm. You know, the difference between the strength and throwing arms is
Yep.
massive between Volpe and Peraza. And I just think that like Volpe's drawn Dustin Pedroia comps for a lot of years, and there is nothing wrong with saying you are going to be a star second baseman for a decade. And he definitely can make it work at short. I just think that's such an important defensive position that I wish, for the Yankees' sake, the Peraza had gotten more of a run, be the guy. But
Yeah, I guess last year
I
though, if they're
digress.
looking at it, you're not going to start both of them that year
Right.
in the infield.
And
And
Volpe won the
he
job out
won
of
the job.
spring,
Yeah.
and then he won the Gold Glove, and now you're kind of stuck. That's how I look at it.
I hope it's a good stuck though. I hope he's projections. We were talking about this last week. I think projections have him at like a 98 WRC plus, so a little bit below league average. Like that's a disappointment. Like he's got to be better
Mm-hmm.
offensively than that. Even if he's hitting ninth, he's
Yes.
got to be better
Yeah.
offensively than that. And that's like another thing with this lineup, to go into the lineup a little bit. Like you added Soto and Verdugo, I love it, but unless they get some improvement out of Rizzo, who's coming back from concussion, he was good before that, but if he needs to be good, or something needs to happen with Stanton, or something needs to improve with LeMahieu, like you can't just rely on two hitters to have a good lineup. They were ranked 22nd in baseball, I think, last year in offense, and at points it was way worse than that. If all you're banking on is Soto and Judge to be MVP candidates, your offense is going to be 15th at best. Like you can't just have 2 out of 9 hitters.
Well, as you said, Torres is good. I mean, I
He's
hear you, but
Torres can't be your
uh,
third best hitter.
interesting. I think with what they've done in the outfield, they've improved their offense quite a bit. I agree with you on the question marks. I have Stanton as the 2024 comeback player of the year uh,
Why?
because he's so freaking good. And I
He
know
was
that,
so freaking good.
yeah, I know. I think that my entire point comes crashing down when he has a quad something,
Yeah.
and I get that, but uh, I just have a feeling about. I think this guy's really like he was the he was an all-star, and when I say he was the MVP of the All-Star game only last season, I don't mean that it means anything to be MVP of the All-Star game.
Yes.
I mean he was a star of the game in 2022.
2022, he had a
I'm not
good
talking about
first half. Yeah.
I'm not talking about
I
2017.
know.
So and then he's been hurt since, but
And he's
but
what, 32 years old now?
yeah, no, I get it, and the injuries are definitely troubling.
Do you remember when
Um,
Aaron Boone last year talked about how there was a question about Stanton rounding the bases, and like his mobility, and basically Aaron Boone's answer was he can't run at full speed. Like,
That's not permanent. I can tell you what happened. Do you want to hear what happened
I
there?
do.
I so uh, the way I understand it, he earlier in the season he hit a ball to the wall. I We thought it was going to be a home run, so he came out of the box a little slow, and it wasn't going to go over the fence, so he accelerated, and that's what kind of where he got hurt.
Okay.
And so for the rest of the year, this guy's so serious about being on the field and being there for his team and all that stuff that for the rest of the year, he was really scared that that was going to happen again. So it wasn't physical; it was more mental. Like, I don't want to pull that thing again. It wasn't like he doesn't actually run like an old lady. Like, he was like, I got to stay on this field for the rest of the year, and this has happened earlier in the season.
You don't see
So he
the
spent the
problem
off.
in this, that this player you're going to say is the comeback player is like so potentially physically fragile, he can't sprint.
What I say is he spent the off season getting to a place with his conditioning
Yeah.
where he's going to feel better about that at the
I hope
beginning of the
so.
year. Now, again, am I aware that I'm not making a lot of points to back up my bold assertion? Absolutely.
Well, that's why it's a
Am I
bold
aware that
prediction. That's okay.
I'm out on a limb here and could be atrociously wrong? Absolutely. But I just know, and I know that seriousness of purpose doesn't necessarily create performance especially once you're an older player. But I know how serious this guy is and how upset he was with himself last year
Good.
and how he used Cashman's comments about him
Yeah,
and
that
his
was
injury
that was
history
another
that
thing.
day.
You never hear Cashman say something
He
like
was
that.
mad about
His
that, and
agent called
as
out
if he needed,
Cashman too,
yeah,
and
and as if he needed
Yamamoto's
more
agent.
motivation.
What, wasn't there a
Same
connection?
as
Yeah.
Yamamoto's agent, Joel Wolf. Yeah, that didn't have anything to do with not getting Yamamoto, but yes, that did happen. Um, there's just so much there mentally for him. He's so not the guy that's like, I've got my big contract and I'm getting older and I'm just gonna spend the next couple. It's not the Ellsbury plan. He wants to be
That was
the guy,
that was
and
that was
and
an all
so
timer.
yeah, yes, but now are his legs going to allow any of this to happen? I don't know,
So
but I'm betting on the person.
let me ask you a question. What date are you going to post the Giancarlo Stanton best shape of his life article? Is that going to be February
Well,
20th, March 1st?
let's see. The position players are February
Okay,
26th.
great.
I'll walk up to him in the
I'll
clubhouse and say, "You are the 2024 comeback player of the year." Um, let's do a story about that. And knowing him, he's a good guy, but he's
and
not
that's
very.
one thing I'll say about
He's gonna be like, I'm not talking about that.
Stan is he has handled his struggles in New York as well as anyone has ever handled them. He's always stood up
Yes.
and answered the questions that has been asked of him. He's never shied away from criticism and all that, and I give him a lot of credit for that. And I think if he didn't act like that, there would be a lot more hate towards Stanton than there has been
And the one
for
that's
his
such a good point.
performance, because it's been
And the one thing that I think is forgotten too, like I'm starting to see like the whole acquisition of him sort of referred to in shorthand as one of the Yankee mistakes, but he's done a lot for them. He's been clutch. He has been during pennant race when they were trying to make the playoffs in 21. Remember that big series he had at Fenway? I mean, like he is.
Oh, in 21, yeah, and he was great in the COVID playoffs. I remember he had
That's
a
right.
big, and he was. I mean, yeah, 2018 he was good all year. I forget how he did in the playoffs in 2018 against the
Not
Red
well.
Sox.
In fact, disastrous. And then he got back, and that shows what kind of guy he is. He did a lot of work on not chasing that slider low and away that he was exposed on in 18, and became a more disciplined hitter after that playoff.
And then the injuries happened in 19. 2020 he did well in the playoffs. 21, like you said, big down the stretch moment. And then yeah, then we're already in 22 and he was an all-star, and then the wheels fell off, and it's been a disaster ever since. And that's why I say with this lineup, it's like Stanton, I know, is probably going to be hitting fourth or fifth on opening day because he's Giancarlo Stanton, right? But there's going to come a point in the season where if he's hitting 189 like he was last year, like you can't have that behind Soto and Judge in a lineup and expect that lineup to be productive. Like something has to give with him or LeMahieu. If LeMahieu's going to be leading off, he can't be a 245 hitter like he was for most of the season last
Yes,
year.
LeMahieu leading off worries me a little for their sake. I'm glad you brought that up. I don't think that's ideal.
What's the alternative? Verdugo probably
They
against
don't have.
righties, like because Verdugo against righties is very good, but like unless Volpe surprises everyone and turns into a leadoff hitter at some point this season, yeah, that's what I said. It's like as there's names that were added, and I know there was an article written by Mike Petriello this week that talked about how
Yeah,
the Yankees, other than the Dodgers, added the most value this offseason. And like I get all that. It's just I still have so many as a person who follows this team way too closely, that is that an unhealthy level, like I still have so many questions with this team, and we're about to start spring training. Couple other things I wanted to talk to you about. So do you think that this could potentially be Cashman's last year as general manager?
that's hard to see. He's in year 2 of a 4-year contract. I think the bigger question is this his last deal as GM of the Yankees? And I think that's really
Yeah.
possible. There's some stuff toward the end of my book that I don't want to blow right now. No offense
No, it's fine. I'm
on
very much looking
his
forward to
future.
reading it, by the way, and I'd
Yeah.
love to have you
Well,
back
thank
on
you.
after it comes out, just so everyone knows the Yankee Way, the
Appreciate that.
untold inside story of the Brian Cashman era, coming out in May. And if you, because I remember I had
Thank
you
you for
on
that.
for what's that?
Gee, I said thank you for that,
No, I know
Andrew,
because
for giving me the
I
plug.
had you on for the Cheated book, which was
Yeah.
fantastic as well. So I'm looking forward to reading this and having you back on.
Well, thank you. I'd be happy to do it, of course. And I'll just say that in terms of Cashman's future, uh, I'll say this: he was closer to leaving after the 22 season than anyone realized, including Hal Steinbrenner. And um, he's been doing this such a long time.
Yeah,
I don't think anyone I think there's an outside chance that he does this until he's 80 because he's never done anything else in his life.
I know
Literally,
he's an intern. He's an
literally,
intern. It's amazing.
right. So there's perhaps a very deep identity moment. If I'm not Brian Cashman of the Yankees, who am I? Not projecting a little, but I mean, it's when you've done one thing your whole adult life, that's really something. But having said that, um, in the group that he has, like Gene Afterman, who's been one of his uh, most trusted confidants he's ever had, the assistant GM, now lives in California, is still working, but doesn't have an office at Yankee Stadium anymore. Um, he's had some around Tim Nearing and Michael Fishman, and these people have been together for a really, really long time. And I think that continuity is one of the things that the Yankees really have going for them, preceding Cashman, because the people who taught Cashman what he knows were with the Yankees in the 70s. And so they have an organizational continuity that is like none other, and they're not going to abandon that lightly. But having said all that, if he wins another one, at that point, why are you coming back when you're pushing 60? I'm
So you
just
think he
saying.
would walk away at that point? Yeah. I mean, do you think that's
If
what he's holding out for though? Because it's been so I did I don't want to compare the research I did on Cashman to the book you're writing, but I did last off season. We did a like a 4-part in depth
Mhm.
podcast about Brian Cashman, and I learned a lot in doing that. And I actually gained a lot of respect for the influence Cashman had in the '90s under Stick Michael and
Oh yeah,
under Bob
oh
Watson.
yeah,
And it's
yeah,
like I think he got a lot of shit from casual fans saying, "Well, he inherited that team. He didn't do anything." It's like no, he
oh
had a
yeah.
huge hand in all of that. But then I think once he sort of negotiated his way to more power uh, post George's death, and in that mid when was it the 2014 or 2015 time frame where he was able to sort of take a little bit more control of baseball
Well, it
ops.
was actually after '05 where George gave him full control
Yeah,
over
but then
baseball
didn't he
operations.
almost leave again in like '08 or before '09?
The time that he knew he was leaving and had to be talked back was after the '05 season.
Okay.
But he had a few opportunities after that. But the real time where he was like, he actually quit after 2005.
Okay.
And then Steinbrenner said, "What do you need to stay?"
Okay.
And he laid it out, and Steinbrenner said, "You can have all of it." And pretty much, I mean, there have been things that have come up along the way, like the Hank Steinbrenner era. Um, there have been times
Yeah.
when he's had powers ebbed and flowed in
Yes.
that organization, but basically since 2005, he's been in charge of baseball operations.
And so if you look at like this new era of the Yankees, the Aaron Judge era, right? It's like so many great things that you can point to, but then in recent years, so many misses, like so many, whether it's free agent signings like Rodon or trades like the Montgomery for Bader trade, like so many misses and misevaluations on this team. And when you, like, I look back to the 2018, 2019 Yankees and you look at that lineup and you're like, man, it seems like they leaned way too far into one type of player. And at one point, the lineup was Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, Luke Voit, Gary Sanchez. It's like, objectively, how did they think that was like a balanced lineup? How did they think that lineup was
Well,
going to be
yeah,
successful? Like it's five of the same hitter with the same weakness, like very easy to exploit.
I can't wait to talk to you about this once you've read the book. And I'm not trying to do a plug, but like there's so much. You mentioned the Bader for Montgomery trade. I think you're going to think that was a trade that made sense after you read the book. And I know that's a bold claim.
I understand.
But
So, I mean,
yeah.
I at the time.
No, but like going back into their deepest beliefs, that was actually them getting back to what makes the Yankees. So what you just described, Voit at first, Torres at short, like that whole 21, like they realized at a certain point that they'd gotten away from their North Star of how they evaluate the positions and hitters and things. And they actually, the Rizzo trade,
Gallo
moving Gallo actually was a trade that had a lot to do with defense.
Yep.
Left field defense is hugely important in the Yankee model. And so whatever else happened with Joey Gallo, there was an effort to become more athletic again. That was
21. That was the 21. Him and Rizzo came in the middle of 21. Both of those trades made sense. You add lefty bats to the lineup, and yeah, you're right. Gallo could play defense.
And all of a sudden, you move Glaber to second, and you start emphasizing youth and athleticism at short, waiting for Volpe and Peraza. IKF is the plug-in for that. Like all of a sudden, base hit, not just E6s, or E1s or E3s, excuse me, but base hits. Infield hits were no longer happening. The Yankees' run prevention was shored up in the infield. The model that has been in place for the Yankees since the 80s since the 70s with Mickey Rivers, requires an elite defensive center fielder. They got back to that with Bader. There's all these ways in which, again, they agree with your criticism that there was a time around 2020 where they got in the beginning of the 21 season where they drifted from their core principles, and actually they've argued no one has noticed that we've actually fixed it since. That's what they would say.
Because it didn't work out. And I at the time.
Well, they were in the ALCS a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
So I think they would also quibble with you on working out. In fact, you should spend 67 minutes with Brian Cashman. He would answer these questions more colorfully than I would.
Love to. I think he would punch. I think he would punch me in the face, to be perfectly honest.
Nah, if he didn't punch Joel that day.
Yeah. Why do you think? Why do you think he was so defensive that day?
Good question. That had been bubbling up for years. I'm basically sitting here as a reporter who's heard these things and knows how he feels, representing to you some of what he would say. So I've heard a lot of his objections and his group's objections. They're really proud of the process that they have. And the analytics thing, I think you guys, I want to presume that you guys would agree, but the analytics thing has become such a weird boogeyman in the narrative around the Yankees. In an era where you'd be so stupid not to have an analytics program, and the Yankees have more scouts and more it's just the way that this is discussed is so wrong.
And that was another thing with the Ben Ruda thing, right? That he also talked about.
Yeah. That. So he's actually right. Like you take a guy that was in our system for a little bit, he's cherry picking a couple of drills. Kevin Reese, their head of player development, is a former player. Their head of pro scouting, Matt Daly, is a former major league player. There are organizations out there that have only rocket scientists. I'm being facetious, but you know what I mean? The Yankees are much more traditional and old school than some organizations. So when they hear all this stuff about analytics, it just drives them crazy. It's like, you can criticize me for being, I don't know, I'm not handsome like Brad Pitt. Fine, fair to say. but don't tell me I'm a bad reporter. I know I'm a decent reporter. You know what I mean? It's like criticize, like it's not right. Like, so they're going, that's not what's wrong with us. So they're mad about that, and also they have a very loyal and close group on a human level. Michael Fishman has been loyal to Cashman, a good soldier. Tim Naring has been a good soldier, great scout. So Cashman is not only defensive for himself in a moment like that, but for years has been getting really tired of watching his guys get criticized. And so I think a defense of a guy like Fishman was something that was a long time coming. It wasn't by name, but it was like about the program. And I can tell you that, like, I was in this is GM meetings are very intimate. Like they happen in this one little resort. Everyone's mixing and mingling. It's not like the winter meetings, which is this big production. So I'm at the bar/restaurant and on the property a couple hours later, and around the dinner hour and later with a number of Yankees front office people, and they were so grateful that he stuck up for them like that. It was really good for morale, and I think that was part of it. So
I get that.
there was somewhat strategic. There's also a conspiracy theory out there. Hal Steinbrenner's Zoom that day was not strong. And it happened the same morning. It was like, well, I talked to Aaron Judge and we're going to bunt more. It was like, it didn't really satisfy.
It was bizarre. It was really weird.
Base.
And it was like, to then hear what Cashman said 4 hours later, it was just like, whoa.
So if you think that Brian Cashman doesn't understand that he's wiping Hal Steinbrenner off the back page by behaving strongly. So there's a lot going on there. There's authentic emotion, and there's some real New York savvy and loyalty to his people. He's so loyal to Hal. It's like, you know what? Hal's going to get a lot of shit for this. Maybe I should take the shit. I do think that's got to be part of it, too. He didn't tell me that, but I know him. And he thinks like that.
I trust your take on that. My thinking at the time was Cashman is feeling the pressure and that this could be his last year if things don't work out, and that's another reason why he was a little bit defensive, not a little bit, a lot defensive in that, and that if they have another middling season, and even if frankly they just scrape into the playoffs and don't really do anything, I think it's a real question if he comes back. At least it would be. I would hope there's more question if he's coming back, because it's like, how long are you going to just keep running it back before you finally say this isn't working?
That's where his blood would boil right there. He'd be like, what do you mean isn't working? We're in it every single year. You're lucky you're not a White Sox fan. He'd probably think, it is working. That's what they want to like,
and maybe it's an unfair standard to hold, but you compare them to, let's call it the Astros and the Dodgers, the two best teams in each respective league over the past 10 years. Mm-hmm. Compared to those, it's not working. And maybe that's an unfair standard, but when you have the resources of the Yankees and you have this self-proclaimed, it's World Series or bust every single year motto, mm-hmm. That's why I think it's fair to say it's not working. And last year certainly didn't work. And the problem I had with Brian Cashman's comments were he seemed to defend his process and just say, oh, injuries happened and some bad luck happened. No, you were an 82-win baseball team, not because of a couple of bad luck ball bouncing the wrong way. You went into the season without a left fielder.
I think that there's a level of defensiveness that is maybe a little too strong on some of those issues, but I don't think it comes from being worried about getting fired, because I don't think he's worried about getting fired.
At this point, yeah, he's been there since the 80s. Like,
I mean, he'd rather win than get fired. Don't get me wrong. He doesn't want to get fired, but it's not like he needs a job anymore, like financially, reputationally. This guy's in the Baseball Hall of Fame no matter what happens. I mean, everything is set. That doesn't mean he's a competitor.
He seems like a very competitive individual, and
and he is. So he's in that. But I don't think that the anger came from like, oh no, I'm going to get fired. It came from like, as I said before, stop criticizing Hal. Stop criticizing my people. Stop criticizing.
That's never going to happen,
We're
Brian.
doing a good job.
You're the general manager of the Yankees in New York. There's always going to be criticism. That is the beauty of being a sports fan in places like New York. People care. So there's always going to be criticism.
100%. And the fact that people care pays his bills, because the ticket money, the cable money, everything. I mean, so 100%. Agree with you on that. I was looking in this in my phone. To what we're talking about like the Yankees expectations of success relative to reality or to other teams. This is a quote from Lee McPhail in 1972 when he was the general manager of the Yankees, the very end of the CBS era of the Yankees. He says, and at this time, of course, he's talking about the 30s, 40s, and 50s. He says, the Yankees are in a strange spot. They are not competing against the Tigers, the Orioles, and the rest of the league. They are competing against ghosts, and that's the battle you can't win.
That's fair.
And I think that extremely the ghosts of the 90s are what the Yankees are going to have a hard time shaking off for a long, long time, too, because the run that they've been on since 2009 would have been considered a smashing success for any other organization. And
yes, three missed playoffs, right, in that run, I think. 13, 14, 4. 13, 14, 16, and last year.
Yeah, and every winning seasons, although I understand so that their goals are higher, and that's kind of the point of that quote, that sentiment. And I read that, I dug up that quote in my research, and I showed it to some Yankee officials, and they're like, "Oh God, yes."
Sorry.
So, and that's it, right, and that's fine. Again, like the passion and the history and all those things, they also market that stuff. So I get that it's complex, but from a baseball operations standpoint,
and the ghosts keep getting advisory jobs with the Yankees. Okay, you've got Andy Pettitte and all these guys keep every 6 months coming back to be a special advisor, and you got monuments going up every other homestand.
Yes.
The ghosts aren't going anywhere.
Well, the marketing arm and the baseball arm are maybe not in complete lockstep on those things. But although obviously it was baseball that brought Pettitte in, and that was a good idea. But they're just in the next GM will have to face that too. Now the problem with firing Cashman after this year, say, is that if it doesn't go well, is that what do you do? Where do you turn? You start all over from scratch, right? Right. And a lot of people would stick their hands up for the job, but they do have a process in place that remains very admired by the industry. So if you're promoting from within,
that's probably more of the same at that point if you're promoting from within.
Yeah, and is that good or bad? Like, are you bringing in somebody who might completely change the way the Yankees do business? I mean, at some point that'll happen, and those things are cyclical and do happen, but are you comfortable with maybe you're not?
Yeah, and the grass is always greener because I look at what the Red Sox have gone through in recent years with their GM shuffle, and right now with what they've done they're getting a lot of criticism for how they've operated this offseason, and I would not want to be that. I would rather be the Yankees than the Red Sox at this point.
You would. I was going to actually ask you that when you brought up the Red
Sox. I mean, it's not like a slam dunk though, because the Red Sox have 3 championships since or no, 2 championships, 13 and 18 since the Yankees won in 09, but they have last place bottom out finishes. They've changed general managers a handful of times, and they're the Red Sox and they don't want to spend money this offseason. It's like, no, I don't want to be that. But
right. But you've had the celebrations in the past decade. So
but at the same time, I look at the Yankees and I'm like, at a certain point, I think if you have to eventually say, if our goal, if we want to win a championship, we want to win the pennant, and we haven't been able to do that, like eventually something's going to have to change, even if you're competitive every year and you're in it every year. Like that, as a fan, I want that, but I also want them to get over that final hump, which they haven't been able to do.
Oh, they want it too. They're frustrated too, and unfortunately, I don't know that there's an executive in baseball that knows how to design that specifically. Like there are models for how you build a good team over a season. Did the Diamondbacks figure it out last year? Or did they get hot at the right time? I mean,
and who knows what the Rangers are going to be this year, right? Like the Rangers spent all that money on top free agent talent. They had a couple players come through their system and develop and stuff. Let's see what they are over the next couple of years. And I'm sure if they are just middling, Steinbrenner and Cashman will point and say, see, they made moves in the short term and they were not thinking long term, and look at where they are.
Well, it's interesting because you bring up the Rangers. So Chris Young, who I covered as a player and has that competitiveness, he went all in. He's like, yeah, he kind of tried to do what we're talking about. And I like, all right, now you're trying to design, you have a good team. Now you're trying to, at the trade deadline, design like a World Series winning team. And they won the World Series. But the move they made with that mentality was Max Scherzer, which did not work out for them at
Jordan
all.
Montgomery was the
So
move
what is
to potentially, secure that
yeah, yeah,
rotation,
yeah.
ironically.
And that worked out, but that wasn't the
No.
all-in move. That was like a solid move, and then he got hot, and Scherzer didn't even hardly pitch, and when he did, he wasn't good. You know what I'm saying? It's like impossible to say, okay, like if you said to Cashman like $100 million if you win the World Series this year, like just do it. You can't. Yeah. It's just so fluky, right? I mean, fans don't want to hear
it. Have you ever
like,
asked
geez.
Cashman or got his thoughts on like players like Montgomery leaving the organization and going to another level, and then there being reports and in some cases like players like Sonny Gray specifically calling out, well, the Yankees did not do X, Y, and Z, which is why I'm better now.
Couple things on that. They take a case, like everything I've been saying, they don't generalize, they take it case by case. But I did reporting on like not getting Verlander for 17 would be an example. And then he takes off with the Astros, not trading for Coy, takes off with the Astros. Guys doing better elsewhere. And what the Yankees admit is that they didn't have a pitching program in place until they hired Matt Blake and did a pitching lab and kind of modernized their operation, where these guys would have been at their best with them.
How many seasons?
One of the reasons
Blake was hired before the 21 season?
No, so okay, I'll get to Montgomery. But just so speaking broad strokes, they feel that, like, for example, one of the reasons Larry Rothschild got fired was because Nathan Eovaldi didn't turn into somebody good while he was with the Yankees, and he did after. That was one thing that really was a bug up the butt of the front office. Yeah. We had this guy. What the hell? And there's a couple examples like that. They don't think that if they'd gotten Verlander and Cole when the Astros did, the Yankees privately are like, we wouldn't have turned them into those guys. We weren't as good as the Astros pitching wise. They wouldn't have been. Verlander would not have been Verlander, and Cole would not have been Cole with us then. They believe that. It sucks for them to acknowledge that to themselves. But so they redid their pitching program. They feel better about it now. Not player development and major league. Matt Blake is a tremendous pitching coach. Larry Rothschild was too. I'm just saying it was more modernized. With a guy like Montgomery, though, they push back on it. They say he got hot, but when you look under the hood at his underlying the quality of his pitches and his stuff, he was actually kind of a very similar pitcher with us than he was with them. They see it that way. That's how they see it. They don't see a lot of fault in that, and that is what they think. They think. Let's see how he plays out. Like, yes, he got hot and good for him, but he's not a.
I thought when he went to St. Louis, he immediately started throwing more four-seam fastballs up in the strike zone. Like his pitch mix was different. Like,
yes, but they looked at it, so it actually then changed again. I'm speaking off of memory now, but I have looked into this. Initially, yes. Then I believe he went back to his comfort zone a little bit more with the two-seam by this year. So it changed. They changed him right away, and I think he kind of drifted back into becoming who he'd been. I'm not looking at any data right now or anything, but I can tell you that the Yankees studied. Anytime someone succeeds elsewhere,
crawls right up their ass. I'm sure it upsets them. Yeah.
Yeah. And on this one, they found that ultimately he's more similar than the narrative suggested. Sonny Gray, they think, hated New York City, the environment. That's a good example of the Yankees could have done a better job with him and Gallo. And if I may be forgetting someone else, about like scout and evaluate whether this guy can play in New York, because that's a real thing. We talked
to when that trade happened. We got at the time, I'm forgetting her name. She covered the A's for MLB.com, and she said Sonny Gray is not going to be able to handle New York on our show as soon as the trade happened. And I'm like, oh, well, that doesn't sound good. So that's why it's like, that sort of personality evaluation needs to happen. I know we've taken up a lot of your time, so thank you so much. Very quickly, all the Vegas projections have all the Vegas win totals have the Yankees at like 93, 93 and a half, which is winning the division pretty handedly. The
Mhm.
Orioles went up with the Burns trade. I think they're second at like 90 to 90 and a half. How do you see the AL East shaking out right now?
Oh, predictions are so tough. And I'm not running. I don't have. I'm not running the models
I
that
know.
these Pacotas and Zips and all those are. I'm obviously surprised by the pessimism on
Me
the
too.
Orioles with how much talent they have. Um, I would. I always sort of say like my job is to tell you what has happened or what is happening and why, and it's math people's job to project what might happen. I certainly think that the Orioles are
Okay.
better than the Yankees. I don't understand why the models don't see it that way. I guess from I have to know my limitations there and leave it at that. But I would love to interview
Yeah,
somebody that
I
came up
think
with
you
that
agree
myself.
with me in that, like, are the Yankees going to be better than last year? Yes, I think so. But they better
They
be.
better
Not just
be.
that, but
Yeah,
I think so, based on all the
yeah,
talent they
they are.
added. But I still don't think they're the best team in the division. Could they be if a lot of those
No,
ifs we talked about turn out good? Sure. But
I don't think you have to be anymore though. I mean, I wish I loved the one
I
game,
did
the
too. I
previous
liked the one
playoff
game wild
system.
card better than the 3 game. Do you know that every single series of wild 3 game wild card has been won by the team that wins the first game? So
I did not know
it's
that.
basically a 1 game playoff, which they went away from.
Well, that makes me feel a little better because I miss how much it incentivized
Mm-hmm.
winning the division, the one gamer. So I feel like September baseball has really taken a hit without that
Yep.
mattering the last 2 years. But now maybe you're telling me it matters a little more than I had thought.
To
So
not play that wild
maybe it
card,
does. I
yeah,
hope
yeah,
teams see
sure,
it the
yeah.
same way.
I
Yeah.
guess
It seems to me like if you have three, if you have 27 innings rather than 9, then it's a little bit more fair. Like, but I like that it was
yep.
unfair because it
Me too.
incentivized the
Me
division.
too. It
That's all I'm
wasn't
saying.
supposed to be fair. Win the division, then you don't have to deal with the
Right.
unfairness. Okay, Andy, thank you so much. Definitely want to have you back on later in the season once that book comes out. But go check out Andy
Thank
on
you.
Twitter and order his book. I think Yankee fans are going to like it a lot.
Thanks, guys. Always good talking to you, Andrew.